Welcome everybody to our third webinar in the Headless Commerce Professional Development Programme. We'll make a start shortly. We're just going to give it a minute or so for our last minute entries. So bear with us, we'll be starting in just a minute. Hi, for those of you just joining, welcome to the Headless e-commerce masterclass. We're just waiting for a few last minute entries and we'll be starting in just a minute. Hi there, thank you for those of you who just joined. We will be starting in just a minute. We're waiting for a few last minute entries. Okay, let's make a start. Hello and welcome to the third webinar in our Headless e-commerce professional development program, Understanding Headless Architecture. And my name's Mike and I'm the moderator for today's show. I'll shortly hand over to my colleagues to do introductions. But before then, you'll see that you have a questions box on your GoToWebinar desktop. And we've got a discussion session planned for the final 20 minutes. And that's where we really, we think we're going to get a lot of value out of this webinar. We've had some really interesting questions from students on the course already, but please do add your questions during the presentation and we'll get to as many as we can in the final section in the discussion. And what we can do, if we don't get to your question, then we can always engage with you offline. So welcome to the show. And if I could just hand over to my colleague, Tim, who'll make the introductions.
Hi, thanks Mike, and good morning everybody. I'm Tim from Profound. We are a digital agency for those of you who don't know us, and we specialize in delivering high-value, customer-focused digital projects fast. I'm really pleased to be joined today with our friends and technical partners at Gradient Edge, and I'll just let those guys say hello to you themselves, guys.
Hi everyone, I'm Andy Hill. I'm a digital platform architect and co-founder of Gradient Edge. For those that don't know us, we're a product engineering organization and technology consultancy. We do a lot of work helping companies modernize their digital commerce platforms with accelerated products and architecture oversight. Myself, I've been lead solutions architect on a number of large digital transformation programs across consumer product groups for companies like Canon Europe, grocery retail for clients such as Alcourt and Glaze. So hopefully I can be here to bring a bit of an enterprise perspective around the API enablement journeys.
Yeah, and hi, I'm James Welcher. I'm co-founder and CTO of Gradient Edge. My background also is had about 20 years in the e-commerce space. I used to work as an architect on the ATG commerce platform back in the day, and then was CTO of Spindrift Group, which was a digital agency. Worked on some of the biggest e-commerce implementations across Europe, including some of the ones Andy had mentioned. We worked with on the likes of Tesco and Canon and T-Mobile and many others. As part of that as well, we had a number of products that we'd created there, including a CMS product and an API, a hypermedia API layer to try and API enable the ATG commerce platform back in the day. So that gave us some really good learnings of how far you can push that sort of approach that I think we'll touch on a little bit later on. And then I co-founded Gradient Edge with Andy a few years ago, really to try and help companies move from the kind of the legacy commerce platform area into the new era of cloud native API first headless commerce. Back to you, Tim.
Thanks, guys. Okay, so we'll just kick off with a bit of a preview of the agenda for today, just so you guys know what we have in store. I'm just going to start off with a bit of a recap of our program to date. There are a few people on the webinar today that joined the program mid-flow, so I just want to summarize a for you guys what the program is about, and then we're going to dive into a summary of our modules 5 and 6 before bringing that to life with a little bit on enterprise architecture and a case study, which Andy and James will lead on when we get to that stage. We're then going to wrap up with a summary of today's webinar and give you a little preview of what's coming up in our next modules. And as Mike mentioned, we want to get into the discussion phase of the webinar today quite quickly. We've had some really interesting questions come in advance of the session today, and we want to give enough time to answer those. And we invite you guys to ask more questions as we go through. You should have a little chat panel in GoToWebinar there. Please don't be shy in coming forward with questions. And yeah, we're going to make as much time for questions today as we can. Okay, so as I mentioned, just a little bit of an overview of what the program is about and why we put this together. It was an idea that we had at the very beginning of the coronavirus pandemic, where we were getting requests from new clients who were looking to do something very quick with their e-commerce proposition in order to react to the uncertainty and the opportunity that existed within COVID. And we realized there was a bit of a knowledge gap within the people with those people we were speaking to. They didn't really have much of an understanding of the modern approach to e-commerce and digital transformation. So we wanted to put together a little program that brought to life some of the key concepts and ideas behind what you need to consider when thinking about a more modern e-commerce transformation. So all in all, we have 8 modules in this program. They're tailored and aimed at people who work in technology, digital, e-commerce or marketing teams. It's been broken down in modules in this way to help you build your knowledge incrementally. And every single module has got quite an array of supporting content that we're hosting on our website, everything from thought leadership blogs right through to technical documentation, white papers. And we also have recordings of all of the webinars we're doing in this series that are available online for everyone who's registered. So if you haven't had a chance to dip in and out of some of the content that we have there, please do feel free to go to our website, profound.works, and have a look around the Headless section. All of the modules that we designed was actually intended to lead up to an event that we wanted to hold in London in October, which we're calling our masterclass. The idea behind that was to give you guys the opportunity to come along with your challenges or your questions or your ideas and actually get some time with us and our partners from Gradient Edge, trying to understand how we can bring some of those things to life and help you with some of your challenges. We are still kind of optimistic that we'll be able to have that event in October, but we're not confirming anything yet because obviously the situation with coronavirus is still a bit unpredictable. But if that event doesn't go ahead, we are happy to have some free workshops with you guys. If you want to come with some challenges and some questions, we can do those on a one-on-one basis on a video workshop as required. Okay, so back to today's agenda, and I'm just going to summarize the couple of modules that we've covered off and released in the last month or so.
Okay, Tim.
Sorry,
Tim. I was just going to say, what is Headless? It's just this sounds like a great opportunity for us to have a quick poll just before you kick off with actually explaining it. I'm just going to open a poll now, guys. So it would be really good to gauge how familiar everybody is with the Headless term, and just to help us out. So a poll has just appeared on your screen. If you could just take a minute or two to select. Okay, I think that's everybody who's voted so far. Now, let's have a quick look. Okay, that's really interesting. So it looks like we've got a real kind of bell curve in the middle here. And so I guess that's going to help, Tim, when you're going through the summary. So most people seem to have heard of it, but it looks like everyone's keen to learn more.
Okay, cool. So yeah, getting back to that then. So our module 5, it was really designed to reinforce your understanding of what headless technology is and how it can help you to drive digital innovation. Given that we have a spread of familiarity on the webinar today, understanding what headless is, I've got a couple of slides here that can just bring the concept to life for those who are less familiar. I also cover this off in more detail in webinar 2, so there's an opportunity to go and rewatch there if you need to. But in order to understand headless, we first of all just have to think about what went before headless, what systems and tools we were working with for a long time before the headless concept arrived. And the most typical type of software or platform that we were working with would be called monolithic or traditional. And just to understand what that means as a term before we go into headless, a monolithic platform is basically a suite of technology where everything inside it is very tightly dependent and coupled together. So you'll often find web CMS systems with things like personalization, search, A/B testing, marketing automation, all in one big slab of technology. And those monolithic platforms are very feature rich and very powerful, but they're also quite complicated to both work with and also to develop on. And it's not uncommon for those platforms to become quite unwieldy and difficult to get the most out of. And we bump into people that are only using 5 or 10% of the capabilities of their platform because they're just too complicated or they take too much effort to use those more advanced features. And another feature of a monolithic platform is that typically speaking, you'd only really get one piece of software serving the experience on one single front end. So if you wanted to have a website or a mobile app or an e-commerce platform, you would end up having to stand up one piece of technology for each of those channels, typically speaking. And the process of doing that does obviously mean that you end up duplicating effort and increasing workload, but also increasing your license overheads and your support and maintenance overheads on those technologies for each of those channels that you want to use them in. And this is where Headless kind of came in and flipped the approach on its head, really. So a headless approach to a digital estate is fundamentally different. There is no one all singing, dancing piece of technology necessarily in the mix there. With the headless approach, you are liberated to go and find the best of breed backend technologies that you like and that fit the needs of your business at the point in time that you're researching it. So you can have one or many kind of backend systems in this model, and they can be based upon your needs at the time. So if you only need e-commerce and web CMS, then those are the only things that you need to look to put in place. But in the future, you can grow into a PIM or a DAM, or actually bring your CRM data into the mix there. So all of those independent platforms can build up your estate. And then we have what's called an API layer that actually bridges all of those platforms and sends information and data to our front ends. And again, you can have as many front ends as you like in this model. You're not tied on a one-to-one basis with the technology. So if you need a website and a mobile app and some wearable stuff, you can stand up all of those front ends, design the UX that is really appropriate to those individual front ends, and then request the information and the data from the relevant backend systems to service those channels and those experiences. So with this approach, you're kind of freed up from any technical constraint. You can create the front end experiences that your customers really want. And you also can reduce your workload. So if you're updating prices and product information in your PIM, you can have the comfort to know that if your API layer is built correctly, you can push those updates out to every channel that needs it with just one update. You're not actually duplicating work. And final point on this, swapping backend technologies out is much more simpler in this model. If you grow out of your DAM or your search tool and you want something different or more enterprise, for instance, in the future, you only need to replace that one component part of your estate. You don't have to touch anything else. You just have to reconnect that one piece to the API layer and everything will flow back through as it was before. So it's a much more flexible and future-proof approach to digital platforms, particularly within e-commerce. And getting back to our module in this session, module 5, we've got some key lessons here. I think the one thing that I'd like to just mention here is this white paper really does help you to frame the benefits of a headless approach and how it can help you unlock value and agility within your brand. Because when you work headless, you normally find that you can deliver projects faster, and that's not just the initial build of a platform, but actually the ongoing maintenance and improvements that you want to make to those systems can happen a lot faster. As I mentioned before, your multi-channel customer experiences are created without any kind of technology constraints or duplication of content. And you can also unlock your digital teams from doing that low value work that they might be doing in the monolithic world, so they can focus more on improving experiences across all of the channels you're working in, and work on more value add stuff really for your customers and for your users. And yeah, key takeaways from our module. By the end of module 5, you should have been able to define quite clearly what you need from a business point of view, but also from a customer experience point of view from any transformation you want to make into headless. And it's really important you get that understanding, because that empowers you then to be able to ask the right questions of the technology vendors that you would be approaching as part of that transformation. And there's a little key point here to take away, that not all headless vendors are equal. There are a number of monolithic vendors out there that have just built an API on top of their platform, and that doesn't make them natively headless or natively a good fit for a headless estate. So our white paper equips you with the kind of questions to be asking of the vendors to make sure that they are really that cloud native headless first technology that was born in the cloud, not bolted onto the cloud, because that really it really is important that you understand the limitations and the differences between vendors who are claiming to be headless and those who are truly headless when it comes to planning your future digital transformation. Another thing here, when you're thinking about the transition into headless, you don't have to go big bang anymore with headless. It is possible when working with headless technologies to actually have a more phased or iterative implementation of a new platform. And therefore you can remove the risk of those big bang exercises that you might have been through in the past, and ultimately get your team delivering faster time to value for the investment. I've got a little slide here that helped to bring that to life, actually. It's a fairly typical, in our experience, indication of the difference in timescales required for a monolithic project versus a headless transformation. We worked for years on monolithic e-commerce transformations, and it's very rare for anything on an enterprise scale to go live much faster than 12 to 18 months. And that brings with it a lot of risk. By the time you get to the end of that design and build phase, your business requirements might have changed, your customers' needs might have changed, and you're just building up risk, and you don't really know until you get to that end phase whether or not it's going to be successful. But with a headless approach, there is the opportunity to actually bring value much faster, and we've done a few projects now where we've managed to get our first release live within 3 to 6 months, and then we get into that cycle of continuous improvement. It's really important for digital and e-commerce teams to become comfortable with that constant state of flux that you need to get into, where you're continuously learning and improving the experiences on your website one bit at a time, and getting those experiences out into those front end channels as quickly as possible, because you're going to learn much more if you can move as quickly as this and learn much more and extract more opportunity, and also capitalize on new opportunities as they come along. So hopefully that helps to frame the key difference from the time to value between a monolithic and a headless approach. And it leads us quite nicely into thinking a little bit more about the fundamentals behind the headless approach, and probably one of the most critical, if not the most critical component of a headless architecture is the API layer. And module 6 is all about that API layer and getting an understanding of it. And it is a more technical module, but that's because it's intended to help the development component of digital teams to set themselves up for success when planning a shift into a headless architecture for the first time. And here we've just got a few key lessons from module 6. I think the one thing I'd like to stress is that the API layer is probably the most important, if not more important than the technologies that they bridge. And it can be quite easy to make a mistake when modeling out and planning that API layer, particularly if your development team haven't got that much experience working with headless technologies or an API first world. So our module 6 white paper explains some of those important factors that are involved when making plans to move to an API first approach, and also what the pitfalls are and how to avoid them by avoiding a poorly modeled API layer. And we also cover off some of the do's and don'ts of API consumption, which is really key to successful headless transformation. For those of you that are perhaps less technical, who need a bit more of an understanding of what an API is, I've just got a little example here that I'll just talk through very quickly. What we're just trying to do here is demonstrate the process that goes on with an API in a headless estate in particular. And we're just mocking up on the left there, we have like the experience on the front end. Let's pretend it's a website or an app for the purpose of this example. And then on the far right, we have the component backend technologies that is powering our headless estate. And in yellow in the middle there is our API layer, our aggregated API layer. And what's happening here on the front end, someone is making a search request, they're querying against the term for white shoes. And the front end sends that request off to the API layer. And there'll be some logic in that API layer that will know what to do with requests like that. And in this situation, what it's doing is it's actually going out to 3 separate back-end systems and getting bits of information. So in the first instance, it's going into our search engine, and it's saying, okay, give me all of the product IDs that are relevant for white shoes. And once the API layer has those product IDs, it's then saying to the e-commerce engine, okay, for these IDs, can you give me all of the product names and descriptions and prices and promotions that are relevant to these white shoes products? And then it's going into our DAM and our CMS and saying, okay, I want merchandising information now, and I want product media. And all of those pieces of information are being brought back to that API layer and being blended together and sent back to the front end in the form of a search results page. And all of the results on that front end are ranked according to the relevancy rules that are within our search engine as well. So this is just an example really of how the information and the request moves from the front end to the API layer to the back end and back to the front end again. And all of this happens if it's a really well-designed, well-planned API strategy. This happens at lightning speed, and you would notice the difference between a really well-formed headless estate versus one of those old monolithic platforms. The speed of return of information from the back end to the front end is normally much faster in a headless implementation. And then just a few key takeaways from module 6. Hopefully by the end of module 6, you'll understand more why a well-formed API model is critical and underpins your headless strategy for the future. And it's really important to remember that the API will arguably be the most critical component in your headless architecture, and that's why it's really important to get it right and make sure it's well designed. And if you're in a situation where actually you're working as a technology team with headless technology and APIs for the first time, we strongly recommend that you find a partner to help you through the API planning phase. It will pay off dividends in the future, just getting that upfront governance support on how to plan and implement the APIs for the needs you have in your business both today and in the future. Because it's really easy to get it wrong up front, and it's really hard to fix it if you don't find out you got it wrong until too late. So working with a partner, even if it's just up front for that initial period of planning, is really valuable and something we really strongly recommend. Andy, I know you had some things you wanted to bring to life there with regards to the enterprise architecture side of things. Do you want to pick up on it from here?
Yeah, thanks, Tim. Yeah, so bringing a little bit of an enterprise context to the conversation, I wanted to just provide a bit of a backdrop around some of the commerce platform modernization, broader modernization journeys that we're seeing enterprises going through. Put API enablement into the context of those wider journeys and maybe pick out a few of the key milestones. So, I mean, the most important thing to emphasize in enterprise transformations is really develop a clear platform vision of where you want to get to. Of course, align that with your particular business goals. But yeah, it's really important to have that North Star, if you like, and then you can phase that transformation piece by piece, and it all seems a lot more manageable from an otherwise complex journey. And that end platform vision, well, it could be a cloud native platform, it might focus on homegrown microservices, it might be about API enablement and headless agility, it might be about developing a flexible eventing architecture underpinned by data and machine learning. But it just makes the whole process and vision and phasing a lot simpler if you start off with that end vision rather than trying to sort of step your way almost into the unknown. I mean, if you're an SME, then the equation is not as complex. You might be able to really quickly adapt your systems, API enable and go headless, but our larger enterprises, in my experience, typically need an element of program planning and phasing to really realize these benefits. So the basic flow in this diagram is from sort of larger, more monolithic, less agile systems on the left to increasing microservices and agility to the right. As I mentioned, every organization is different. Not all follow all the steps here, but you'd actually be surprised how familiar and transferable the journey often is across different verticals. So this slide is actually an amalgamation of 2 or 3 of our case studies where we've provided this type of platform vision and phasing road mapping across CPGs, grocery, and even B2B sectors. The reality with enterprises is there's often several legacy monolithic systems of record. You'll typically have an ERP, a monolithic commerce platform. You might have a dedicated customer system of record. But so there's some unique challenges as you move up the enterprise stack. But it's worth noting that many enterprises already made some progression on this service-oriented API enablement journey. Many have introduced service-oriented architectures. They may have enterprise integration layers that are helping those monolithic systems to talk to each other and pass data around the enterprise. And this is actually a really important foundation to this journey. This actually helps you to architecturally decouple your digital commerce platform from those other systems that otherwise, other systems that might not be able to move as quick. And that really helps you to free up your digital platform, your digital commerce modernization journey, even within a more complex enterprise architecture. So once you're on that journey, you may begin with a monolithic commerce platform. Most enterprises do and have done, but you can start to modularize that platform. You can begin to separate out modules and components within that monolithic system. That may enable you to plug and play different payment gateways or separate address verification integrations, you name it. So, myself and James have been on a number of projects and programs where we've pushed this modularization in quite a long way, and as far as it can go, really. You can start to develop some DevOps agility around this, but you do kind of hit a limit. It only gets you so far, and you still ultimately have a tightly coupled front end. This doesn't give you the agility to innovate or to meet the increasing omni-channel requirements and wider company strategy. So this is then at the point where we see enterprises really ready to embrace API enablement. They're almost forced to embrace it if they otherwise haven't embraced it. The business side really understands that the technology platform is starting to limit their ability to meet their strategy, and various organizations have various champions in the technology side who may or may not have already been extolling the virtues of APIs, but ultimately you do need to take this step, and it is absolutely then pivotal to the rest of the diagram. And in itself is as those that have read the white paper, you will have seen that, and James will touch on it in a bit. There's a number of considerations around that API enablement. This step in itself can be an iterative journey. You might go through REST APIs to implementing a mediation layer to mediate across different components of that commerce platform. You may add in GraphQL. So that in itself is a transition in itself. It's often a step that enterprises go through, and from that moment on, then they really sort of got a modern API first commerce platform. It sort of enables and unlocks the agility of the rest of this roadmap. You can straight away deliver headless commerce across those multiple channels. You can decouple the front end presentation layers, providing that enhanced agility and DevOps capabilities, the CI/CD pipelines, which then in turn enables you to become more agile organizationally with vertical aligned teams who are then able to prioritize, build, deploy features independently at speed. And then really depending on those, that original platform vision, you might continue to decompose your platform into microservices or focus on cloud migration or cloud nativity, or underpinning your platform with the kind of data and machine learning that increasingly businesses need to kind of meet their goals and align with their competition. If you go to the next slide, Tim. So yeah, key lessons and tips. with enterprises, you really got to develop a phased digital platform roadmap. Start that with a clear vision and architectural principles of where you want, that guide you to where you want to go to. Really, one of the most useful frameworks for thinking about this digital transformation is the Gartner bimodal framework. And for those that aren't familiar with that, it's a really nice framework for getting to the essence of, well, how do you build in agility into the enterprise, even though there's all these legacy systems of record that can't necessarily be innovated on or migrated very easily. And it really sort of breaks out into two modes or streams of speed for enterprise evolution. And the first mode is a predictable renovation of legacy systems for the digital future. So it might be a case of you've got you slowly want to develop a new product induction management capability, or you've got to upgrade your ERP system. And that shouldn't constrain your ability to innovate on your digital platform. And that's mode 2. It's you unlock that second stream for faster iterative experimentation, where you can start adopting, experimentation and MVP approach, and just starting to have more agile teams delivering features to end customers. A couple of other sort of lessons from the enterprise landscape. A number of organizations are embarking on, or have embarked on, or are in between really large in-house microservice building programs. And an observation of that is, if you are building in-house, for any really large enterprises out there, really invest in a strong technical engineering function, really strong architecture oversight. Some of those organizational patterns, where you may have implemented a monolithic, they get stretched, and it's the old phrase where if you can't deliver a monolith very well, you're not going to deliver a fully homegrown microservices architecture very well either. So you need to really invest in that. And I think the trend we're seeing is that even some of the organizations that are trying that, they are starting to come back to actually really understanding that, well, there are best of breed headless commerce platforms out there that have done the heavy lifting around those microservice APIs and getting them all talking to each other, and service discovery and scalability and all the rest of it. And you can actually implement a really nice best of breed architecture that's headless, that really splits up your systems and allows you to build microservices around, but where there's differentiation for your business, the undifferentiated heavy lifting of just a cart API or a pricing API, that's something which you should really think about whether you need to build that yourself in-house from scratch, or whether you can pick other APIs off the shelf.
Cool, thanks, Andy. I think James, you're going to bring some of that to life now with a bit of a case study, aren't you, from one of our joint projects?
Yeah, thanks, Tim. So this is a recent project that we have worked on in partnership with Profound. Horizon Platforms are they're powered access platforms rental company. They provide cherry pickers, boom lifts, things like that for rental, and have a few other areas of the business as well, but that's the core of it. And they needed to digitally transform what they were doing, implement B2B commerce, help their internal teams be more efficient, and really set themselves up for a kind of a future-proofed digital estate to really enable them to have an agile, be able to the agility to kind of move forward with their business plans. So for them, we implemented a best-of-breed e-commerce platform utilizing commerce tools, plus Kentico content for the CMS, and a number of other pieces. For the front end of this, this used a componentized React layer with Gatsby to provide a Jamstack approach, so blazingly fast front end performance. brilliant SEO across the board. And with this, we use some of the examples that Tim was touching on earlier and some of the pieces that Andy mentioned there as well. We created here a middleware layer, a GraphQL middleware layer that's able to aggregate across all of the backend components, principally across Commerce Tools and Kentico and a number of the other backend internal systems related to the ordering and so on. And that provides a single data graph that the front end can then access. It's able to aggregate together all of the concerns around authorization, around caching and so on, and just provides a really simple way for the front end teams to then be able to innovate and add new functionality really easily, independent of what's happening on the back end. And on the back end side of it, then, because we're using the likes of Commerce Tools, it's just really simple to be able to access that either via the REST APIs that Commerce Tools exposes, or via the GraphQL, the native GraphQL layer that's exposed there. So to aggregate across a number of backend systems, there's a number of approaches that you can actually take with that. We've become huge fans of using GraphQL for that, because GraphQL as a technology is really taking off in the last couple of years. But it's really tightly aligned and focused on being a brilliant technology to use for the front end layer, because it enables the front end teams to be completely independent of what's happening on the back end. It's incredibly efficient for the front end logic then to just access the data it requires from the back end, whereas previously you would have to, front end would have to make multiple calls to REST APIs, and it could get very fine grained and very chatty at the API layer. GraphQL enables you to just make very tightly focused calls to get just the data that you need to then render the front end components, which then results in, for the end user, just blindingly fast speed. And as we all know, you know, the speed of any modern website is a huge factor to user engagement and SEO performance and so on. The technology we use for this middleware layer, we use the likes of Apollo server for the back end. We actually deployed this one on Azure in a headless, or sorry, in a serverless manner. We've done this in the past with AWS in a similar way. And what's great about these sort of approaches is they're effectively stateless, other than some caching concerns. They're effectively stateless on the server side. So that enables you to use, you know, modern serverless approaches like using Lambda on AWS, function apps on Azure, and so on, and then fronting that with an API gateway, and then that API gateway endpoint can be edge cached using CloudFront on AWS. So you get an edge cached endpoint that all of your clients are able to access, which again just massively improves the speed and the responsiveness of the sites. And then on the server side, whether when you're using a serverless approach, or if you could equally do it using a containerized approach, you have effectively infinite scalability on that side to be able to do the work. So it's a really good example of why these headless approaches and why modern public cloud technology is just enabling a new breed of technology that the monolithic platforms of own just can't compete with. Another interesting piece with this was we were able to use the microservices strangler design pattern. And what this means is that when you have an existing technology estate, it's probably a number of pieces in play, and you have an existing site, and it's working, it's providing functionality to the users. But then what you can do is you can slowly start to replace pieces of either the back end or even the front end technology gradually. So you then get to show value to the end user a lot quicker than before. Previously, with the monolithic platforms, it would usually mean, you know, a replatforming. You'd have to replace everything. It was very difficult to replace a piece of the puzzle without replacing the whole lot. Whereas with the new headless approaches, it's a lot easier to just replace pieces of it. So in this instance, with the Horizon Platforms project, we were able to actually take parts of the journey and replace those whilst retaining the existing site. So take, for example, the product pages, you could replace them whilst retaining the checkout journey from the existing site. And that was enabled by the use of the likes of Gatsby to kind of create a pre-rendered site that could be plugged in for just specific pieces of the journey. And similarly on the back end, you're able to kind of iteratively improve that and iteratively integrate with additional backend services over time, and slowly replace out some of the pieces of the backend estate, and add value to what's happening on the front end. And it harkens back to the point I think Tim had made earlier with the ability to just to change this over time and see value from, you do a discovery phase and then you quickly start to see the results within, once discovery's over, within sprint 1 or sprint 2, actually start to show that value to the client, which is again just a game changer from what we would have had to do in the past. And really, this is just a great example of lots of the pieces that Tim and Andy have talked about in the previous parts of this talk. Just seeing those kind of how they actually come to life, and it's a great case that we're quite proud of how, we're just incredibly seeing the value of this kind of headless approach, and all of this digital glue, if you like, that kind of lives in the middle, and having this API middleware layer to actually enable that and pull stuff together has just been really powerful for us. So back to you, Tim.
Great, thanks, James. So that was really interesting, and good to see some of those things brought to life through a case study there. And we're still working on that Horizon project. We're on that continuous improvement phase right now. So maybe in a future session we'll be able to give you an update on how we've been getting on with the subsequent work that we're doing there. But back to today, we're ready to wrap up now. So just to summarize where we've got to in this webinar, first kind of key point to take away from everything is that the conditions for trading today really does demand that brands, particularly e-commerce ones, do adopt a much more agile approach to the way that they do digital work in order to remain competitive, but also to capitalize on opportunities and to stand out from your competitors. And if you do adopt a headless approach, this will normally result in a faster time to value, and also give your teams more freedom to make decisions that are much more flexible and future-proof. And remember that headless is not just about changing the way that you build or manage your digital estate. It actually can revolutionize the way that you work in new channels, but also the way you work inside your own business, and give your teams like a new lease of life to actually start seeing value being returned in their projects much faster than perhaps previously they had. And final, probably the most important takeaway here is that if you're new to headless and APIs, we recommend getting some advice from an external partner before embarking on this, and that advice can be of various shapes and sizes. It doesn't have to be big whole projects. Just a conversation here or there can help, but yeah, you really do need to understand the program ahead of you before you actually make the decision to crack on and start delivering in the headless way. And that's where an experienced partner can help you with that. Okay, and just a bit preview of what's coming up in August. So in about a week's time, we're releasing module 7, and this is really about the fusion of content and commerce, and explaining how you can bring those two worlds together into really focused customer-first experiences on the front end. And then our final module, module 8, will be the preparation for our masterclass. We're looking to release that around about the middle of August. And as I mentioned earlier, we're still kind of tentatively thinking about our masterclass event in London in October, but watch this space. We will send you updates as and when we've got more firm plans around that, or whether we're going to push it out to be more in 2021. But please don't let that prevent you from getting in touch with us. If you think from anything you've seen or read or heard on any of these webinars or white papers that there's some value that we can add to some of the problems you're trying to solve right now, we're happy to give you guys some time in free workshops just to help you battle through some of those challenges and get to grips with what your digital transformation to headless could look like. Okay, that's the webinar wrapped. How are we getting on for questions, Mike?
We're doing pretty well, actually, Tim, and we had a really good selection from students on the run-up to the webinar, and we've had several come in. Everyone's been quite proactive, so thanks. What we'll start off with is one that a number of our students have asked over the last couple of weeks as they've been working through the most recent 2 modules. And this is, and I paraphrase this, our digital tech team has been built around our existing monolithic technology. How feasible is it for them to switch over to headless technology? So I guess from a resourcing perspective, this is going to be quite a common challenge. So it probably sounds like one for you to answer, Tim.
Yeah, okay, good question. I think it's quite natural to have this kind of concern or fear about switching approaches in technology, particularly if you've built a team over a number of years to support one piece of technology or one part of your estate. But actually, I find, I don't know if Andy and James can vouch for this in their experience as well, but I find that technology teams are quite excited about a switch over to headless and from monolithic, because it gives them more opportunities to be creative and to actually do more technically interesting work. We often find that monolithic changes and updates and maintenance and replatformings, they're quite laborious and quite hard going, and they don't use the latest technology. So normally you would find that within your technology team, you've probably got the skills there to be able to work on a headless program moving forward with fairly minor amounts of retraining. But I think the key thing there is that most of those technology teams that I've encountered are really excited about working with something much more modern and much more adept to being able to deliver value faster. Yeah, I find that really quite a positive thing when I'm talking to technology teams.
Yeah, I'd add Tim as well that the developers often relish the chance to just kind of upskill on new technologies as well. Whereas let's say commerce developers have been working with the likes of ATG and Hybris and things like that in the past, which are predominantly Java-based platforms, to actually move into some of the more modern tech and moving into kind of cloud-native approaches where there's usually a lot more kind of JavaScript and Node and technology like that involved. Any of the kind of the good developers that are the previous skills, they will jump at the opportunity to kind of upskill onto those. And as you know, kind of good developers can just reskill in whatever the programming language is. It doesn't matter. So you actually find a huge productivity boost of people actually wanting to work with these sort of technologies as well and being passionate about them, as opposed to kind of just groaning at, oh God, I have to do another one of these things again. So yeah, it's good all around.
I think I'd just add to that as well. Part of the transition will be to sort of model your teams around agile teams, cross-functional teams, and that's a really nice transition. It's not, as James and Tim said, a lot of the skill sets, technical skill set is transferable. And what we also see works quite well is that augmentation model. So lots of places will, rather than just sort of outsource to an SI a full build or replatform or whatever else, more and more organizations are seeing the benefit in augmenting their current teams and helping them with that transition with a few skilled resources as well, which I'm a big fan of.
Okay, guys, that's really useful. Thank you. Now, we've had another one come in. Actually, this is from today, and this is clearly off the back of, I think, the second half of your presentation, Tim, and possibly about the case study as well. Raki's asking, how do you know if you need an API middleware layer, or can the front-end applications talk directly to the back-end services? So who wants to tackle that one?
I'll take that, Mike. Yeah. Yeah, it's a really good question. That platforms such as commerce tools and many of the best of breed kind of cloud native commerce and content platforms now, they all provide either a REST API or a GraphQL API, or often both, to be able to interact directly with. So when you're building your front end for that, you can often get started just by building so let's say you're using React or Vue.js or whatever front end technology you need. So you're creating a single page app. You can absolutely get going with these things and talk directly to the backend services. So you can talk directly from your front end app to commerce tools via its public APIs, either via its GraphQL APIs or its REST APIs. Similarly to any other pieces of the puzzle that you need to talk to. And this usually works fine for getting started, and lots of the kind of the starter stores or kind of accelerators that you'll get to see this. This is the approach that they take, because it's the easiest way to learn and understand how these technologies work. But very quickly, especially with larger enterprise implementations, you'll find that there's extra stuff that you need to do. You may need to augment the data that you're returning from commerce tools, for example, with additional pieces of information, or there may be other assets that are coming from your own internal microservices. And it can very quickly get to the point where your front end is then talking to 3, 4, 5, 6 different back-end services, and each one of those then needs to manage its own authentication, authorization, needs to have its own endpoints, and all of the benefits you get from using GraphQL on the front end to avoid the chattiness of talking to, making multiple REST calls to the back end. You're kind of back in that mode again, where because you're talking to these multiple back end systems, you end up making multiple of these calls direct from the front end and having to aggregate that together within the client. That you kind of loses some of the benefits you get from the GraphQL approach. So it does reach a point that we found usually pretty early on in the project where it does make sense to have some form of middleware layer to kind of aggregate across all of those, so the front end can retain that ability to be, just have one data grid for it to query, so that the front end devs can continue to have the agility that they really get from that headless approach. So we pretty much always would recommend having a look at that middleware layer, but it shouldn't be something that precludes you from getting started and the ability to kind of see value early. Actually, going back to that case study we looked at with Horizon, we started off doing that approach of actually going direct to some of those, and then a few sprints in, we've been working on it in the background in parallel. We kind of added that middleware layer in, and that's an approach that we can take in many places. So yeah, hope that answers that one.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Actually, we've had another one come in that's, as we're on the subject of APIs, this will be a good one to ask now as well. This is from Sammy, who's in the audience today. What's the difference between APIs that have been bolted onto monolithic platforms and those that have been developed as from an API first perspective? That sounds like an interesting one. Do you want to carry on, James, and tackle that one?
Yeah, sure. So we've a lot of experience of this in the past. So the monolithic commerce platforms of old, the likes of your ATG, Oracle Commerce, lesser extent Hybris, any of those platforms of that era, they all began their life as as often Java-based server-side apps, and they didn't really have APIs available. You would make a request to the server, it would render the response and send it back. Now there's a huge amount of value in those platforms were best of breed of the time, and then to actually add APIs on, you have to kind of build a layer of technology on top of the existing platform, and the problem with that is it's never as clean as you would like it to be, because you're always subservient to the technology approaches that have been used to build that monolithic application. So there's just a different approach you take when you approach these sort of platforms, and you take an API first approach. You're really designing it from first principle of saying, right, what are the APIs that we need? What are the resources and the endpoints that we need? What do we need to expose? How are we going to manage the auth around all of that? And then the underlying technology that's used to actually build those and what's behind those endpoints doesn't really matter, and it's the API is the first thing that becomes the focus. And platforms such as commerce tools that take that API first, or in fact API only approach, it's really the only way that you can kind of truly model an API in that next generation way. Because often with the monolithic platforms, when they bolt on APIs, the APIs themselves can look fine, but you'll find then that it might cover 80% of the functionality, but then there's this other part of the platform that maybe doesn't have APIs, and there's some admin UI you have to go to that doesn't have any APIs exposed, so you have to have some way to fire up this admin API and tweak some parameters within that. Whereas the modern platforms, truly API first platforms, they will have everything exposed via an API, which just gives you the agility and the ability to kind of make whatever changes you need to the platform moving forward. It's a very nuanced, and it's a subtle one, because every platform that you see now, they say, do you have APIs? Yep. Are you in the cloud? Yep. And whether that term of cloud would just mean, yeah, we just happen to have it hosted and it happens to be running on a bunch of EC2 instances in AWS, but hey, that's cloud native as far as we're concerned. So there's a lot of nuance and a lot of liberty taken with the terminology on these things. I don't know, Andy, do you have anything more on that side you want to add?
Yeah, I guess it's a really interesting conversation. Actually, I mean, you know, we work with a number of clients that are you know, doing platform assessments. They're looking at their digital estate. They're assessing some of the DXP suites, and there's plenty of them, and that, you know, they are also trying to rise to the challenge of knowing the direction of travel in terms of digital platforms for headless and API, and you know, tended to retrofit an API layer on top, and it's really hard for a lot of clients to sort of navigate that difference. And yeah, what we kind of advise them, and we should note that, you know, there's a right architecture for a right size of organization, and you know, undoubtedly at the SME level, you know, a digital experience platform may work for you, but they are increasingly sort of constraining you. And we just try to encourage clients to go for a diligent process, really look at and understand not just the feature set within the DXP, but what's exposed by the API, and that's often the key difference. And yeah, look, if that fits your future roadmap and ambitions, and then, you know, it's a good fit. But typically, you know, most organizations do have some you know, customizations and extensions and some funny processes somewhere, and that's when, you know, suddenly the bolted on API, not only does it not cover those use cases, but it's not very extensible, or maybe not even extensible at all. So if you're in that space, then that's when, you know, you need to consider a more flexible API platform with, you know, API first, and you can augment those APIs and extend them, and they've often got much better cloud native architectures for, you know, exposing webhooks and events to kind of hook into. So yeah, look very closely, I'd say.
Okay, that's great. Thank you, Andy. Thank you, James. Guys, I'm conscious of time. We're technically about 3 minutes away, but I've canvassed the team, and it looks like everyone's happy to overrun by a couple of minutes, simply because we have 2 more audience questions we'd really like to tackle today. So members of the audience, if you're okay just to hang on for a few more minutes, we've got 2 more questions, and then we'll literally do a 30-second wrap up before we finish. So the next question, and this is definitely something picked up from your presentation earlier, Tim, and that is it possible to avoid a big bang platform migration transformation when you have a bespoke legacy e-commerce platform? That's a really good one.
Okay, well, the answer is probably. It really does come down to the nuances of that platform and how open it is from a code-based point of view. So we've worked with it in a couple of projects recently where we have been able to adopt the Strangler model and just replace parts of that website bit by bit with new headless components and splice it into the front end. But we've also encountered, I'm thinking of one example recently where actually it's a proprietary e-commerce platform CMS system, and yeah, the vendor of it is not really open to actually exposing any of the code to help us do that. So we've had to find other ways around to actually, other ways of implementing and bringing value. And it doesn't necessarily just come down to a technical solution. There's also ways that you can adopt the project and the phasing to perhaps get that more Strangler approach coming in, but just not necessarily strictly just at a technology level.
Okay, thanks for that. Again, conscious of the time, I think we've got one last one. This is a really interesting one, guys, because we've not actually had anyone ask this one before. A little bit of a techie one. I'm going to read it out in full. If you're working on a greenfield e-commerce project and you can choose a best-of-breed technology stack, this all sounds great, but most existing businesses will have an estate of legacy services using things like SOAP and FTP for integration. How do you modernize these? So Andy, James, that'll be one for you, I reckon. Do you want to pick this up, Andy?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I think, I mean, it goes back to some of the concepts I guess I touched on. I think, you know, embracing that bimodal approach and framework is really important and really valuable. I think, you know, you don't have to fight those legacy systems, indeed, they're very important for your business, you know, and you want to evolve them and develop them, migrate them, you know, with strong governance and all the rest of things in their own time. But that shouldn't hold you back. And you know, one great you know, tool in the tool set is providing that service integration layer. You know, and there's various incarnations of that from you know, traditional hosted versions to now more cloud native hosted you know, hosted versions. But the basic principle is that you don't fight those systems. You know, you let them evolve at their own speed, but you loosely couple and decouple them from where you want to be agile and innovative, which is your digital platform. And then within that digital platform, you can evolve and you can migrate and you can build together. You know, you can build an API layer and you can go headless. And you know, you can still pass data around those, you know, in and out of those legacy systems of record via those service integration layers. And increasingly, as you have a more agile digital commerce platform, you may be building components in the cloud and making use of all that you know, amazing innovation that's constantly streaming out of those public cloud providers. You will you can just get on and innovate and have an agile platform. As part of that, it may be best of breed components within that sort of traditional monolithic commerce estate. So you may have a best of breed headless CMS, you may have a best of breed headless commerce, you may have a best of breed search, and you know, you can really build that into your enterprise architecture. And it doesn't matter if your ERP only integrates via SOAP, because it's hidden and protected from those you know, those new, more modern platforms.
Okay, that's lovely. Thanks, Andy. Right, everybody, I think we need to wrap up now. It's a couple of minutes past 12. I'd like to thank the presenters for their time today. Really useful and interesting. Thanks to everybody in the audience for your participation and for your great questions. The webinar will be available to view after this event. We'll be emailing you all. Keep an eye on your emails and on the Headless Ecommerce Professional Development Program landing page for future modules, and we've got some great blogs lined up for the coming months too. As Tim said earlier, we're hoping to host an event, a really exciting masterclass in London, in central London in October, you know, coronavirus and safety permitting, and we've got some great stuff lined up for that. So anything else from the rest of the team before we close for today?
No, just thanks to everyone for joining.
Thanks, everyone. It's fantastic.
Okay, lovely. Well, have great days, everyone, and look forward to seeing you hopefully in October and online before then. Bye-bye for now.